Samsung 50S. This has to be the most written about, discussed, argued over, hyped, overrated, and controversial cell in the PEV world today. 5 years after its introduction, opinions are still split about this controversial cell. Some say it's the holy grail, providing high power, high capacity, and a relatively low price. What more could you ask for, really? Some experts even say that this is the bee's knees, and they say, don't believe the hype about the cell overheating or having low cycle life. Others, though, are skeptical. They say that the claims put out by Samsung and repeated by many manufacturers that this cell can do 25 amps continuous and 45 amps peak are just false. I have a long history with Samsung high-powered cells. I described this in detail in my recent 45T video. Suffice it to say that I've been a big Samsung fanboy for almost 10 years. I've built tons of packs with the 25R cells, and I love those. I got back into this hobby about 2 years ago, looking to build a battery pack for my CYC X1 dual suspension bike. Of course, I first looked at Samsung cells and saw that they have two models of interest. The 40T, which is their high power cell at 35 amps continuous 45 amps peak with 4,000 milliamp hours, and the 50S, which is also rated for high power according to Samsung, 25 continuous and 45 amps peak, but this one has a huge 5,000 milliamp hour capacity according to Samsung. I thought, as many of us do when you first read these specs, well, great, the 50S sounds perfect. It has 25% more capacity and it can still push high power. But thankfully, after first reading those specs, I read up more and researched the cells a lot more, and the more I researched, the more I really questioned Samsung's claims for this cell. I first looked in detail at Mooch's testing and thought, wow, after his testing it was clear that this cell had huge temperature increase and huge voltage drop under higher loads. But in the Surron, e-skate, and electric motorcycle world, I was constantly seeing advertisements and claims of ultra-high power PEVs and battery packs powered by the 50S cell. This was kind of confusing to me because from my initial research, it seemed like the 50S was not a high-power battery at all. Then, about a year ago, I started doing lots and lots of battery tests. I was testing all the popular high-power 21700 cells. One of the cells that I was most curious to test and see how it performed was, of course, the 50S. I'm going to include the full 50S test segment I did last year at the end of this video, but in short, here's the conclusion. The 50S is not a bad performer at lower loads, but my expectation after seeing Mooch's testing was that the 50S would not perform well at higher loads, that it'd get hot, and that it would voltage sag like crazy, and this is exactly what I saw in my testing. What exactly is a high power cell? I keep talking about high power cells. Well, when looking at a battery's specs, it's easy to see the spec sheet and compare things like capacity and cycle life. Obviously, 5,000 milliamp hours is 25% more than 4,000, right? Well, I define a high power cell as one that is minimally affected by high amp loads. In other words, the cell has a minimum of voltage drop and a minimum of temperature increase under high loads. We're all looking for cells that can pull a lot of amps, a lot of current, and a lot of power without getting too hot. And here's the thing. Even the cheapest 79-cent no-name Chinese cell from Alibaba can handle a huge amp load for a short time. You can pull 45 amps from the cheapest cell, but the thing is, it's only going to be for a few seconds, and that cell is going to heat up like crazy very quickly. Now, a high power cell handles that big amp draw with very little voltage drop and without getting too hot. The problem with peak amp ratings or peak power ratings for cells or battery packs or e-motos or electric skateboards is that there's no industry standard for the power claims. Yes, this cell we're talking about, the Samsung 50S, or even the cheapest Alibaba cell, can handle and can pull 45 amps, but the question is, for how long? How long before it goes down to 3 volts? How long before it hits 80 Celsius? How long before it blows up? I'll get back to this peak power thing in a second and talk about a very hyped new e-moto, the E-Ride Pro SR. Now I need to talk for a second about marketing and specsmanship. This starts directly with Samsung themselves. I argue that Samsung misleadingly and deceptively markets this cell as a 25 amp continuous 45 amp peak cell. Yes, it can do these numbers, and I'll show that here in a second, but it gets very hot and voltage sags like crazy. Manufacturers then, whether it's e-moto manufacturers, e-skate, Eucs Surron, battery pack makers, etc., they then use these inflated power ratings that Samsung provided for their own advertising to make their products look more powerful and more exciting. I can't tell you how many times I've seen the phrase high-power Samsung 50S battery pack in advertising for EUCs, e-motos, e-bikes, and e-skateboards, especially the new Evolve Diablo. I'm a longtime Evolve owner and fan, but this new skateboard uses the 50S, and Evolve is also guilty of overstating the power specs for this board. E-bikes and e-bike battery packs also overstate their power ratings, and even e-motos like the E-Ride Pro SR and the Altis Sigma. But nowhere have I seen more quote-unquote high-power 50S battery claims than in the area of Surron aftermarket battery packs. This is a field I can say I have some knowledge in, as I've built 3 Surron battery packs myself, and before that I've built over a dozen battery packs. So you can see that the high-power, high-capacity 50S phrase is prevalent in advertising. How can this be the case? Well, I think there's 2 possibilities. Either the manufacturers are ignorant of how the 50S really performs under load, or they do know how it performs, but it's convenient for them, for their marketing and advertising purposes, to repeat the inflated claims that are put out by Samsung. And speaking of inflated claims, that brings me to a very hyped and very talked about new e-moto bike, the supposed 25 kilowatt E-Ride Pro SR. Here's a little segment on that. Okay, let's have some fun with math and briefly go over the E-Ride Pro SR 25 kilowatt power claim. Let's break it down, see if it's possible, and see what the numbers show us for the 50S. So, E-Ride Pro SR. This bike has a 72 volt, 50 amp hour, just going by the advertising, Samsung 50S battery pack. I know from experience that means this is a 20S 10P 20 series, a 72 volt, 10 parallel. Each Samsung battery is 5,000 milliamp hours, 5 amp hours, so 50 amp hours. So it's a 20S 10P pack, pretty common and popular size in the Surron world. Okay, so their claim, 25 kilowatts peak, 10 kilowatt rated, but note that in their advertising, they say this for the motor. They don't list anywhere a peak and continuous power rating for the battery pack. They don't show that as a limiting factor. They say the motor. However, I need to back up a second and say I looked at a lot of the advertising, the different ads for this, and most of the ads say 25 kilowatt, just 25 kilowatt, not peak, not temporary, not, asterisk 10 kilowatt continuous. No, most of the advertising for it says 25 kilowatts, so keep that in mind. On the E-Ride site, if you look at the fine print, it says motor is rated at 10 kilowatts and 25 kilowatts peak. So I'm assuming the motor overheats if it's at 25 kilowatts for too long and is rated for 10 kilowatts continuous. So no rating as far as the battery pack being the limiting factor. Keep that in mind. Okay, so let's go back to the main equation, which everybody should know and have memorized by heart now. Power, amps times volts equals watts. Watts is power, like horsepower. So 25,000 watts, we need to figure out how many amps they're pulling out of this battery pack. Divided by 72 volt nominal, that means you're pulling 347 amps in order to hit that 25,000 watt claim, 25 kilowatt power claim. 10 parallel, so that works out to 34.7 amps per cell. Okay, but the question is, when you hit the 50S with 34.7 amps, what is the voltage drop, the 50S voltage drop at 35 amps? It's pretty significant, let me tell you. I know from my testing and my experience. So the good thing is, luckily, I tested this. I tested the voltage drop, exactly this, at 35 amps. And I tested the voltage drop for all popular high-power 21700. So check out my other videos if you haven't seen. But I spent many hundreds of hours working on that, and now we have a nice database and spreadsheet of how all these cells perform at different amp loads. So I've already tested that. Now, here is our results. I'll show on the screen my results graphs that I made because I tested all the cells at 35 amps and other amps, but the 50S in particular we're looking at. So the 50S had voltage sag to 3.43 volts after 5 seconds. I call that initial voltage drop. So fully charged cell, 420, you hit it with 35 amps, and after 5 seconds, you're down to 343, below 50%, below nominal voltage. Huge voltage sag. At the end of 3 minutes at 35, it was at 3.14 volts, almost at low voltage cutoff. But this is the real kicker and the real kind of thing that stands out to me about the 50S under high load. Huge temperature increase, 44.9, almost 45 Celsius. And that's not the temperature at the end, that's delta T. That's the increase over ambient. So we started, well, hold on a sec. I'll get to this in a second. First point I want to make is this is the worst temperature increase out of all the 21700s I've tested. And I've tested all the popular high power cells. This is the most temperature increase, the hottest cell of any that's gotten the highest temperature increase. So the worst performance in temperature increase at 35 amps. If you're starting at 25 Celsius ambient, kind of normal room temperature, right? 25 Celsius is what, like 74, 75 degrees Fahrenheit. You are at 69.9 Celsius after 3 minutes, almost 70 degrees Celsius. It is ridiculously hot. It is burn your finger hot if you touch the cell. Do you think that's a good temperature for your cells in your battery pack to be? I'll let you answer that question. I'll put on the screen here what that converts to in Fahrenheit. Obviously 100 is 212, so this is what, like 160, 170. I'll put the Fahrenheit conversion on the screen. And that's just at 25, but let's take the common case. Say it's in the summertime or you're in Florida, 33 Celsius, that's, I'll put on the screen, what, like 80, 81 degrees, something like that Fahrenheit. If you start at kind of a warmer temperature, but not super hot, you're at 77.9 Celsius after this temp increase, almost 78, almost 80 degrees Celsius. I'll put on the screen how hot Fahrenheit. The point is ridiculously hot, and this is only after 3 minutes at 35 amps, which is approximately the rating that they're giving us for 25 kilowatt battery pack. So keep that in mind. Here are your temperatures after 3 minutes running it at that load of 35 35 amps per cell. Okay, and for comparison purposes, on the same test I did, 35 amps, after 3 minutes, the model cell P45B was plus 25 Celsius compared to plus 45, and the Ampace JP40, which is the best performing 21700 of all the cells that I've tested, was only plus 18 Celsius. So at 35 amps, 3 minutes, plus 18 Celsius, plus 45 Celsius. I'd say a little bit of a difference there. But the thing is, that's not all. It actually gets worse than this. This is kind of like a fairy tale best case scenario, which doesn't take one more factor into account. So it actually, the real performance is even worse. So here's a point. At 35 amps, the eRide Pro SR will voltage sag immediately. So you hit it with 25 kilowatts, right? That peak power, or not even peak, that power advertisement. It's going to voltage sag immediately to 3.43 volts per cell, like we talked about here, 3.43 immediately times 20, 68.6 volts. So you're going from 84 volts, and immediately at 25 kilowatts, your battery pack is zagging down to 68.6 volts. So it's less than nominal, which is 72, less than 50%. You're going from 84 to 68.6 volts in 5 seconds. That's how much the 50S sags, and that's how much the 50S heats up, because as I've said over and over till I'm blue in the face, 50S is not a high-powered cell. It's not made for these high amp loads, and this shows you right there. This is how much it heats up, and this is how much the voltage sags after 5 seconds at full power. So, but the thing is, we have to look at this voltage sag. It affects the power equation above, and it makes it actually even worse because we hit it with full power, right? 25 kilowatts, the 35 amps, but this 347 amp calculation was made at 72 volts at the nominal voltage of the pack, but we're actually never even going to see 72 volts once we hit it with that 25 kilowatt power load. It's not 72 volts, but the pack is actually going to voltage sag immediately to 68.6 volts under load. So we need to recalculate this equation here, because this is at 72 volts. So the real picture is even worse. You're at 68.6 volts. You need to get 25 kilowatts at only 68.6 volts. So in order to hit that, you need 364 amps, 364, not 347. So it actually comes out to 36.43 amps per cell, not even 34.7. So the real power you're pulling in order to hit that 25 kilowatt, 36.43 amps per cell. So that's it. That is the quick back of the napkin math about the E-Ride Pro SR and its power capabilities and how the cell is going to perform. Basically, like I said, this is how much it's heating up. You're hitting it with 36.43 amps. So I thought, why not test the 50S at this power rating and see how it does? So you're going to see that coming up next. And one other quick thing I forgot to mention, my little box here I wrote, about the 10 kilowatt rated power. Again, that's for the motor. They say for the motor, but let's take it as a continuous power rating for the bike, just for, you know, for kicks. What does that translate to for the battery? So 10,000 watts divided by 72 volts, you're at 138.88 amps for the pack. That's 10p pack. That's 13.88 amps per cell. That is okay. That's a fair rating for the bike. That's a fair rating for the cell. And actually, the 50S performs not bad at all at this power level. You can see my mixed load test and my 5560 test on the big Model Cell P50B comparison video. I'm going to include those here at the end of this video, all the Samsung group of tests that I did from that original video. But in general, 1388 is not a bad load at all for the 50S. It handles it really well. I'm going to show you here in a minute. And question is, how long can it run for that and how hot it's going to get? And the question is, at this 25 kilowatt load, how long can it run and how hot it's going to get? You're going to see in a second because I just did those tests. I was finishing up this video and I realized I need to add just a really brief segment here about the Altis Sigma. If you're not familiar with it, not in the e-moto world, it's relevant because they use the 50S. The Altis Sigma is a really hyped and really talked about new bike in the e-moto world, an e-dirt bike. This has just come out in the past year, and there's been lots of hype and excitement about it, mainly because it has a 96-volt battery. It's the first mainstream e-moto to use a 96-volt battery. I'll show some graphics about it on the screen here as well, along with the specs. There's been a lot of videos about this bike by some of the popular YouTube influencers, and some of them have said, wow, 96 volts, it's so powerful that the Sigma is the most powerful stock bike on the market because it's 96 volts. And I'm just like, why? Why is this misinformation going out there? People just don't understand. So just to say again, I'm all for high volts. I love making high voltage packs. I made three 80 volt packs for my Surron. There's one of them right there. I'll talk about in a sec. More volts in general is always better, but more volts doesn't necessarily mean more power. For those of you who already know this, I'm sorry to repeat it, but I see that there's just so much misinformation going on. I need to just clarify again. 96 volts. Volts does not equal power. Volts are not a unit of power measurement. Watts is. To get power, you have to take your voltage and multiply it by the amps. Volts times amps equals watts. Watts are power. They're directly convertible to horsepower, just like a horsepower. So you can have a lot of volts, like 96, but if you're using a really weak cell that struggles to even put out 3 or 4 or 5 amps, if the cell is weak and can't put out a lot of amps, you're still not going to have a lot of power because this part of the equation is not going to be strong enough. You have to have the high volts with high amp capacity in order to generate a lot of power. So I know that's redundant for a lot of you, but I just really want to clarify it. The 96 volt is good in general. It's good to have more volts. Doesn't necessarily mean more power. So let's talk briefly as I can about the Altis Sigma and their exact claims for it. You know, I'm not just trying to give a hard time to E-Ride here. I don't have any axe to grind with them. You know, I've heard it's a great bike in general, and it looks like it's a great bike. But I have an axe to grind with anybody who is, you know, doing misleading advertising for their products. So anyway, back to the Altis Sigma. 96 volt battery that people are excited about. Looking at their advertising, they're claiming 22 kilowatts of peak power, and again, just like the E-Ride, they're saying peak motor power. They don't say anywhere about the battery being the limiting factor. You know, the battery doesn't limit the power at all. The battery, just don't worry about that at all. Battery's fine. Motor is what's limiting the power here. So again, they don't talk about the battery being the limiting factor when in fact, in many cases, the battery is the limiting factor in power. So the battery, it's 97.2 volts. This is from their advertising, 35 amp hour, and 3,402 watt hours. Samsung 50S battery pack. Let's move the light a little bit closer there. So that's their advertising spec. Now, what does this mean? What's the actual configuration of it? Well, 35 amp hour means it's a 7P Samsung 50S battery, 7 parallel. It's 35 amp hour because each battery is 5 amp hours. So let's figure out how many cells it has. So the Samsung 50S has 5 amp hours times 3.6 volts nominal, so each cell has 18 watt hours. We take the total watt hours, divide it by 18 per cell, we get that the battery pack has 189 cells. Really interesting and unusual configuration. So this means that it is a 27 series 7P configuration to get that 97.2 volts. Obviously they don't have 9P or 10P like we usually see in Surron because there just simply isn't space for it. They're already using 27S7P, so it's an unusual configuration. 97.2 nominal and fully charged it's 113.4. And just as a point of comparison, this 189 cells is pretty close to what we use in the Surron world. This battery pack is a 22S 9P that I'm making for my light bee. That is 198 cells, so this is a little less cells total than a 22S 80 volt 9P pack. Okay, so we've covered that, how many cells, what it has. So let's talk quickly about the power, their power claim of 20 kilowatts. Is that valid or not? Is it a legit power claim? First, we have to calculate how many amps are they pulling out of the battery pack at 20 kilowatts. How many amps are they pulling from each of these Samsung 50S to see how hard they're stressing them. So again, volts times amps equals watts. I already said it. So we got 97.2 volts times X is 20,000 watts. Solving for X is 205.76 amps. And again, remember, that's a peak figure that they're giving, peak, so 7P. So 205 amps is how many amps you're pulling at the battery pack at 20 kilowatts, not taking into consideration voltage drop, that the voltage may in fact drop below nominal voltage, which we'll see in a sec actually it does, which is 29.39 amps per cell for the 50S, so a little under 30 amps per cell at this peak power. Now, like I said, and like I talk about here, I have tested every cell at every possible power level to see how they voltage sag and how they do temperature-wise. So I tested the 50S. Among all my tests of it, I did 30 amps. Here are the results. So initial voltage drop, this is after 5 seconds. So you immediately hit it with 30 amps. After 5 seconds, the 50S is at 3.57 volts. Don't pay attention to these pink and yellow. I'll talk about those in a second. That's less than 50%, less than nominal voltage. So as soon as you hit it with that 20 kilowatt peak, in 5 seconds, you're already down from full battery level to less than 50%. After 3 minutes at 30 amps, the 50S is down to 3.27 volts, so not too far from low voltage cutoff of 3.00, but still a little bit above it. And then after 3 minutes, the delta T, how much these cells heat up, is plus 29.5 Celsius. So they heat up quite a bit after 3 minutes. So if you're starting, for example, 30 Celsius ambient, what's that, like 80 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to be at 59.5 Celsius, almost 60 Celsius, after just 3 minutes of that. So now, what's the whole point about this? Why am I talking about Altis Sigma using the 50S, and why I said it's such a missed opportunity? Because they could have used a cell that performs great under high amp load. They could have used a cell and been an innovator to use a high power, high amp cell like what is in this pack here. These are the Ampace JP40s. This is the LT version of them. This is the highest power cell on the market today, the highest that did the best in all my testing. These can do 140 amp peaks, maximum easily 100 amp peaks, and easily sustain 60-70 amps for a long period of time, or several minutes. I said it's a missed opportunity because the 50S, as we see from my testing here, it performs terribly under high amp load. It's the worst cell. Well, maybe actually the 40T is the worst cell, but the 50S is right there next with it as the worst cell to use in this case, because in this situation you've got a small number of parallel groups, only 7 in parallel, with huge amp draw. So in that case where you got the 50S, if you can design a battery pack, say for example this is one block and these were all a huge group of parallel, like 12 parallel or 14 parallel, 50S is great for that because you've got a lot of parallel groups and you're pulling low amps from each group. They had the perfect opportunity to use tabless cells. Tabless are the solution, the best thing to use, where you have high amp draw, and in this case, a low number of parallel cells that are pulling a huge amount of amps. That's exactly what tabless cells like these JP40s, the LT version of them, you can see a little spiral there. It's exactly where these perform Well, and would have been a great choice. Now, let me just show you numbers, an example, quick example of testing. Okay, so let's compare how the Samsung does compared to the JP40. I tested the JP40 at 30 amps, 40 amps, 50 amps, and 60 amps. Here are the results at 30 amps for direct comparison in yellow, and here are the results at 50 amps for comparison in pink. Note that the 50 amp results are just for 2 minutes, not for 3 minutes, because I did not do the test for 50 out to, or 60 out to 3 minutes. But on the 50S, after 5 seconds at 30 amps initial voltage drop, Samsungs were 357 and JP40 376. That's a huge difference, much less voltage drop at the same amp draw. At the end of 3 minutes, the Samsung was 327, the amp pace was at 352. Again, much better performance, much less voltage drop. And at the end of 3 minutes, the Samsung was plus 2950 Celsius, and at 30 amps, the amp pace was plus 15.7 Celsius. So about half the amount of temperature increase, much less temperature increase than the Samsung. So in general, a much better performer at 30 amps. And just for kicks, let's see how the amp pace at 50 amps compares to the Samsung at 30 amps. So initial voltage drop, we're 357 on Samsung, 354 on amp pace. So the amp pace has almost the equal voltage drop at 50 amps, which is a huge load on one cell compared to the Samsung at 30. 327 after 3 minutes, this was 328, but again, it's after 2 minutes on the amp pace. And the delta T was plus 30, the amp pace was plus 24.7, but again, that was after 2 minutes. So anyway, just to make a quick point that they really missed an opportunity here. They should have used tabless cells. It's a great choice, and it's the perfect scenario where you have, because of space, you only have space for a small number of cells in parallel, but you need to pull big amps. Tabless, and specifically these cells, would have been the perfect choice. It's really a missed opportunity they didn't use these. And just to give an example what the power would be if you use the amp pace and you rated it at 50 amps peak, which is these can pull easily, as you see, without even breaking a sweat. Your power then would have been 97.2 times 350 amps. So this would be a legitimate 34 kilowatt bike instead of kind of a questionable 22 kilowatts. Yes, it can. I'm not questioning here. It definitely can hit the 22 kilowatt claim peak power. No, I don't know about the control and motor if they can handle it for long, but in general, the battery can make 22 kilowatts. But again, you see here how much voltage drops and how much even just after 3 minutes the temp goes up almost 30 Celsius. So anyway, sorry, tried to make that quick, but it's relevant, and again, it shows the importance of choosing the right battery for the application. Okay, so I've criticized the cell choices for these two bikes. Let's do something productive and suggest maybe cells that can perform better than what they chose. Keep in mind, first of all, everybody, of course, wants these three attributes from their cell. They want high power, high capacity, and a cheap price. But guess what? These don't exist in one cell. You need to pick two out of the three. It's like the old saying, you want it fast, you want it cheap, you want it high quality, well, pick two. Same thing here. If you want a cell that's high power and high capacity, it's going to be expensive. If you want a cell that's perfectly described, by the way, the model cell P50B. If you want a cell that has high power but a cheap price, that's a great description of the Ampace JP40, which is these guys. It's going to sacrifice capacity. It has lower capacity. And like I said, the P50B is sort of the queen now of non-tablet cells that has high power and high capacity, but they're super expensive. The Ampace JP40, that's these guys, which I'm a big fan of, it has super high power, it's cheap, but it has 25% less capacity than the P50B. Okay, so here are my suggestions. First of all, for the E-Ride Pro SR, they're making a bike at a low price point, so price is a huge factor. That immediately eliminates the P50B, way too expensive to use for the E-Ride Pro SR. The Ampace JP40 would be a good choice for high power, and they're not expensive, but you're going to lose 25% capacity, and probably E-Ride doesn't want to make that compromise in having 25% less capacity on their battery pack. The model cell P45B, with its recent price drops, has brought the price down pretty much the same as a 50S, or even a little bit cheaper. That's this guy right here, P45B. To me, that's the bread and butter high power cell, the best sort of combination of price performance in the market right now. That would be a great choice. and they may even be able to get those cheaper than the 50S. But keep in mind, you're going to lose 10% capacity. Again, like I said, you've got a trade-off for high power and a non-expensive price. Another great option, and I haven't mentioned this yet in the test, the Samsung 45T. Brand new cell. I just got done testing it. That's this guy right here, the bright blue. They perform great. Very similar on power with the P45B, and also not expensive. So for the eRide Pro SR, I suggest sacrificing 10% capacity for much better cells, much better performance. P45B or 45T, they're both name brand, they both perform great and would be a much better choice for this bike. Yes, you're going to lose 10% capacity, but it's going to run and operate much, much better. Now, for the Altis Sigma, as I mentioned before already, the Ampace JP40, I love that cell. I think it's great. It would be a good option for having huge power with a small number of parallel groups. That's my #1 pick. And also, they're pretty cheap now. You can get them for. But keep in mind, it has 25% less capacity, so they're not going to be able to advertise 35 amp hours. It's going to be 28. P50B, obviously, again, too expensive for any sort of mainstream, there it is, for any sort of mainstream pack. Although they would, with a P50B, they would be able to keep that 5,000 milliamp rating per cell, but I don't think they're going to spend, over double, maybe triple even the price of the 50S. Again, the P45B or the 45T, great choices, great power, same price. You're sacrificing only 10% capacity. So where are we at? There's the tablets. So there's your P45B and there's a Samsung 45T. Great choices, great performance. And what is cheaper in the market? I don't know. I think the P45B is a little cheaper because these just came out, the 45T. But here's one other option. Like I said, the Ampace JP40 I think is the best option. I'm a huge fan of the cell. That's the best performer out of all the cells I had. That's why I chose it to build this next Surron pack. But here's another option. They could choose possibly cheaper tabless cells, the back 45D or the EVE 40PL. Here's the EVE 40PL. Here's the back 45D, these pink ones. Let me see if I can turn it like that. Now, the thing is, the EVE 40PL is also only 4,000, and it performs not as good as the Ampace. Ampace performed, let's get it over there. Ampace performed quite a bit better than the EVE 40PL. But the back 45D, that's this guy, that's an interesting option because it does have 4,500 milliamp hours like the P45 and the 45T, and it has better performance because it's tablets, better performance than these two. So the back 45D, even though I wasn't a huge fan of it because the Ampace performed so much better, if they wanted to keep 4,500 capacity and only lose 10% rather than 20, that might be a good option. Tablets, like I said, for 7P, tablets would be the perfect choice. So those are my suggestions on what cells would be better to use for both of those two bikes. We'll see. I doubt that the manufacturers are watching my channel and this video, but if you guys are, not trying to rag on your bikes or your choices at all, I'm trying to provide suggestions from my experience that will allow your bikes to perform even better. Thanks. Okay, so Samsung 50S. Let's get this out of the way. Not super thrilled about it, to be honest, but going to do it for science and get it done. First, we're going to look at Samsung's factory claims, their factory spec for it, which is 25 amps continuous, 45 amps peak. We know it's going to get hot and voltage sag like crazy, but we're going to do it anyway for science. So in order to do that, I got to do my two tester setup again, doing 5 amps on the small one, doing 40 amps on the big one here, and we're going to run it. I'm going to shut it off if we hit over 70C, not going to run to 80C, sorry, not doing that in my home, or if we hit low voltage cutoff of 2.8 volts. So here we are, 40 amps. Oh, by the way, starting temp, 19.7 Celsius. So we're at 40 and 5, and we're going to start 3, 2, 1, 0. $318 initial voltage drop, 318. And just so you can see, they're both running here. This one is on 0.5 amps. There we go. This one is on 0.40 amps. 30 seconds, 308. So, hold on a second here. You may have noticed we're already pretty close to 3 volts. Low voltage cutoff. Remember, In general, we do low voltage cutoff at 3.00 for our PEVs, for our Surrons. Okay, gonna let it run a bit longer though. So 1 minute, 303.45.6, 303.45.6. Again, keep in mind, Samsung rates this 45 amps peak. Getting pretty warm. Now we're coming up a minute 30 and we're already at 3.00 volts. So again, a minute and 30 and you're going to be at low voltage cutoff 299 and 58.1. You're at low voltage cutoff for, you know, in general how you should have your BMS set. But we're going to let it run a little bit longer here. Curious if we can hit 2 minutes before hitting 2.8 volts. Yeah, and we're at 68 Celsius, so 70 Celsius. So 295 and 72.4. Gonna shut it down here. So we're basically at a little over 2 minutes and we've already hit 75 Celsius. Okay, shutting it down. There we go. We're off. And we hit the high voltage cutoff. There you go.
That's hot. 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 That's hot.
By the way here, just to note, so the test is shut off. It's been off for about 15 seconds now. The temperature continued to increase, 78.5. So don't ever run your cells that hot. I'm never probably going to do a test again to let it go that high. I just, again, wanted to make a point to show this is how the 50S runs at 45 amps, the peak rated power. A little over 2 minutes and we hit almost 80 Celsius. By the way, how hot is 70 degrees Celsius? How hot is it for your battery if you run your battery pack to let it get that hot? The cell is so hot that you burn your finger. I can't keep my finger on it. And this is it's already cooled off a little bit. So keep in mind that people quoting 45 amps, after 2 minutes, the cells are so hot, you burn your finger literally touching it. Okay, well that other one cools off now after being tortured at 45 amps. Let's look at Samsung's other claim, which is 25 amps continuous. So I've got the machine set to 25 amps. We're at a full charge. We're starting at 22.6 Celsius. So I'm just going to let it run, see how long it can run at 25 amps until we hit either 70C or low voltage cutoff of 2.8. So here we go, 25 amps. Let's see what your initial voltage drop is. 363 initial voltage drop. $5.69. Remember I said 70 was my cutoff, so I think it's going to be 8 minutes. I think we're going to be pretty close here. And we're actually close to LVC anyway, almost at 3 volts. So here we go, 8 minutes, 305, 69.6, 70.1. So there we go, 305 and hit 70.1 just after the 8-minute mark. So there you go, running the 50S at its rated capacity, continuous. You're going to hit high temp and low voltage at about the same point, right about 8 minutes. So you got 8 minutes running 25 amps continuously. Okay, so here we are after half a day of charging. Gonna test the eRide Pro SR claims. So as I discussed already in the insert that I made about the eRide Pro, their claim of 25 kilowatts peak. By the way, that claim of 25 kilowatts peak, it's only really mentioned being peak in the small print on the eRide Pro website. Almost all advertisements that you see for it just say 25 kilowatts. That works out to 36.43 amps per cell. All the little 50S's are going to be cranking at that amp level. So we're going to test it here. We've got a fully charged, authentic 50S. Ambient temp is 20.5. We're going to test and see how does it do, how long does it last at that amp load at 25 kilowatts, and how hot does it get. So here we go. Starting temp 20.5. Initial voltage drop 337. Again, let's see how long it is going to last. And I'm a little troubled to say that at 30 seconds, we're already 326, 26.1. We're already way below nominal voltage of 3.6 volts, below 50%. The limiting factor. Okay, 1 minute. 322, 34.8. 322, 34.8. So 25 kilowatts. We'll see how long you can ride. Pulling 25 kilowatts out of this 20S10P pack. By the way, if the pack were 80 volts instead of 72, in general, more volts are always better. Sorry, I got a little bit of a cold now. More volts is always better, and at 80 volts, you would need to pull significantly less than at 72 volts. I need to calculate it, but I'm guessing it's about 31 amps per cell instead of 36. So more volts is always better. 80 volt battery, you'll be pulling at least more than 10% less amps for the same power. Okay, 2 minutes. 314, 51.7. Okay, coming up on 3 minutes here. See where we're at. 309, 64.7. 309 and 64.7. So the question is, are we going to hit 3 volts first? Or 70 degrees? Oh, it looks like we're going to hit 70 degrees. It's going up pretty quickly. So where we hit 70 degrees. There we go, 321. So 321, we're already at 70 degrees Celsius. I'm going to shut it off here very soon. 72, 73. Okay, that's it. 340. We're at 304 and 74 degrees. So, and there's our high temp cutoff. So 3 minutes and 40 seconds. That's how long your battery can last on your eRide Pro SR. Ooh. Before you hit high temp cutoff. High temp is going to hit a little bit before low voltage of 3 volts. So that's it. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. That's how long you can ride at 25 kilowatts. Okay, so last test that's related to the eRide Pro SR. As I explained on my calculation about it, 10 kilowatt rated power. 10 kilowatt rated, even though they advertise it everywhere as 25 watt peak. Again, they were saying for the motor, they're calling 25 watt peak, 10 watt continuous. Anyway, let's call it 10 watt continuous power for the battery also. So as we calculated, that comes out to 138.88 amps, 13.88 amps for the cell. So let's see with the 50S how it does at that power. Let's see how it does, how long it's going to last, and until it gets too hot also. So are we ready? I think. Here we go. Okay, 16 minutes, 3:15 and 45.5. Okay, 17, we haven't hit LVC yet, 3:08 and 46.3. Let's see how long it lasts till we hit 3.00. Okay, we're coming up on 18 minutes and 3 volts. Let's see what we hit first. There we go, 3 volts, 17.55 and 47.3. So 1755 is how long it lasted, and 47.3 till 3 volts. Normally, like I said, of course, this is where you would have your LVC and your BMS. You don't ever really want to run your cells below 3 volts, but just for the sake of science, let's let it run a little bit lower. I'm going to go down to 2.8, give the cell a little better showing, chance to show a little more capacity and stamina. But again, 2.8, that's really an absolute worst case scenario. You do not want to be here. We're coming up on 2.8. Let's see where we're at. But yeah, still nowhere near temperature cutoff, only 48.8. It's still hot, obviously, but here we go, 2.80. So we'll call it 1940 and 49.0. 1940 and 49.0. So that is how long the 50S lasts at 10 kilowatts on the E-Ride. 1940, 19 minutes, 40 seconds, and our ending temp was 49.0. So temp actually did quite well, nowhere near high temp cutoff that I have of 70, and lasted almost 20 minutes at 10 kilowatts. Okay, you saw how this test went. The problem is, in the E-moto and E-skate and EUC world, there's no industry standard for real power claims. Cars have a standard of testing the horsepower claims. Motorcycles have a standard of testing for their power claims. E-motos, not so much. How do we solve this problem? How can we fix the problem of no industry standard for power claims? So here's my proposal. All manufacturers should prove their power claims. I'm talking about manufacturers of e-motos, electric motorcycles, scooters, EUCs in general. They should prove the power claims on a motorcycle dyno. That's not hard to do, and it would answer any questions about the real power output. That's number one. Number two is there needs to be more education about battery cells, about the importance of which cells are used in a certain vehicle and a certain battery pack, and the differences between those cells. Hopefully my videos and the work that I'm doing here helps to educate people and helps to get the information out there better about the differences in performance between battery cells. And number three, I really like the Batimo method of continuous and peak power ratings. I think they do a great job, and it can be adapted and modified for this industry. Now, continuous, that's the maximum amps that the cell can pull continuously without hitting the temperature cutoff. So from a full charge to empty, it's the most power, the most amps you can pull out of the cell without hitting the high temp cutoff. But here's an important thing. They set their high temperature cutoff at 80 C. I think that's too high, it's too abusive, and it's very hard on the cells. I would suggest making an industry standard with a lower temperature cutoff for this measurement, say 60 or maximum 70 Celsius. Peak, they measure that as the maximum amps that you can pull from a cell for 5 minutes without hitting either the high temp cutoff, which they have set at 80 Celsius, or the low voltage cutoff, which they have set at 2.0 volts. Now, how that relates to the 50S, they rate it at 16.9 amps continuous and 29.2 amps peak using the testing methods that I just described. I think, like I said, it's a little too extreme. It's a little too abusive on the cell. I believe a more realistic rating for the 50S is 15 amps continuous and 25 amps peak. But what's great about this testing method that Batimo has developed is that it's a repeatable and agreed on standard of measuring power for cells and for battery packs. And remember, you have to keep in mind not only maximum peak power, but for how long. Remember, power times time equals heat. Remember that equation also. I know it's common sense, but I think it needs to be repeated. How much power you're pulling from a cell or that you're putting into a motor or controller times how long you're applying that power for equals how much heat you're going to put into that component. And it's heat, when it really comes down to it, that is the limiting factor in pretty much everything. Okay, and I just wanted to add one really quick thing right here at the end just to say, look, I totally get and understand purchase bias and confirmation bias. I have it too. I'll give you a perfect example. Here are the brakes on my new street build that I have. They're Magura MT7s. I have used MT7s on 3 builds now, plus a scooter. I absolutely love them. They've been great for me, but a lot of people hate MT7s, and you really get ragged on MT7s in the forum as a user. And obviously, it doesn't feel good to research, make your decision, buy something, and then somebody tells you, you made a mistake, you bought the wrong thing. I totally understand that, and I know that it doesn't feel good, and that the title of this video can be kind of upsetting or inflammatory. But let me say this, if you've already bought an expensive battery pack or e-bike or skateboard with the 50S, I totally get that you might be upset at the title of the video. It's a big money purchase, and nobody wants to be told something they worked hard to buy is bad or was a wrong choice. No, here's the thing. Most of us don't have the time or the will or the inclination to spend over 400 hours testing, doing a deep dive on battery tests here like I did. You made a valid and logical purchase decision based on the information you had, based on the research you had, even though that information may have been untruthful or at the least misleading, that they made claims by the manufacturer and that originated from Samsung themselves but weren't really accurate claims about the performance. But your purchase decision was totally valid and logical. But I just want to let you know, I'm right there with you. You're not the only one in this situation, because based on Samsung's claims of power for their cells, based on the claims of the 40T, and that's, hold on a second, based on the claims of the 40T, that's these guys right there, being their, quote-unquote high-power cell, 2 years ago, I bought a crap load of 40T cells, and I spent many weeks making battery packs for my Canyon bike and my Surrons. So both of these bikes, to me, they perform, really, really well. I'm happy with the performance, I have to say. It wasn't until I did all the big battery tests that I did last year that I realized how poorly the 40T performed. It was right there with the 50S at the bottom of each cell results. So, but, like you see from the results of this test, when you use the 50S within its limits, it performs, not bad at all. Both of these, when used within their limits, perform not bad at all. And the thing is, wouldn't you rather know the truth and the facts about how they actually perform than go through life, believing something, claims that are untrue? I think it's better to know the truth and better to know the real performance of these. So hopefully the video helped with that. So in conclusion, is the 50S hot garbage? No, not at all. As you've seen, if it's used within its limits, it performs really, really well. But the thing is, you as a rider have to have the discipline to use it within these limits and know how many amps and how much power you can pull from your battery pack. And importantly, manufacturers using this cell need to advertise it honestly and not overstate the power of 50S battery packs and products. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe as always, and feel free to leave your comments about the 50S in the comment section below. People love to argue about the Samsung 50S, and I can't wait to see the arguments that break out in the comment section about this cell. Now here's the full testing segment of the 50S. Okay, here's the results from the mixed load test, and all I can say is, wow, I'm surprised. I didn't expect it to be this close. So P45B, I didn't have, exact temperatures at the minute, but this is approximately what we're seeing. 31, 33.9, ended at 34.9. Voltage sag, pretty minimal, like normal with a P45B, ending 5 minutes at 369. But the huge surprise is, look at this. No, they almost start at the same temperature. I need to put the delta T, but it's only 0.4 difference, so not really necessary. So 50S, look at the voltage sag, much more initially and hotter, 29.5, 32.2, a little more voltage sag there, 31, 35 almost, 34.8. But look at the voltage sag, strange, it's not, it's huge difference, 4 minutes, 33.9, 37.9, so 4 degrees warmer Celsius. Voltage sag 376, 373, pretty close, went down to 355 when it went up to 23 amp load. And then amazingly at the end, 34.9 temp, 40.2, so pretty big, sorry about the shaking there, pretty big difference, 5 degree difference, but 40 is not overly hot at all for your battery pack. And look at this, crazy, 369 and 368. How is that possible that they're so close when the 50S under constant heavy load, drops like crazy. 50S in general, as long as you're not, if you're running it constant, trying to pull 25 or 30 amps constantly, yeah, voltage drop is crazy and temperature increase is crazy, absolutely. But if you're not doing that, if you're doing mixed like this or constant lower, it actually performs pretty decent. I'm so surprised. Coming up on 5 minutes. 367, 42.6. 50S from US, mixed load test. Almost identical. Well, we started, it actually doesn't matter, we started at higher temp, but ending voltage was 367 instead of 368. Very close, a little bit worse. And we started 25 and 42.6, so we gained 14.1 Celsius, whereas the other 50S gained 13.6. .50S, 10 minutes at 55 miles an hour test. It was kind of warm, it was almost 32. I let it cool a little bit because it just came off the charger and it likes to get warm when charging at 1.5 amps. So here we go. .396 initial voltage drop. Okay. Come up 1 minute. 387, 31.0. 387, 31.0. Okay, coming up on 3 minutes. Well, it's still not very warm. It's good. So 382, 32.9. 382 and 32.9. Coming up on 5 minutes. Well, heating really not bad so far. Kind of impressed. Right, 59, 377, 34.6. Look at this, this is kind of crazy. So at 5 minutes on the 50S, where I just said 377, 34.6, look where the P42A was. 376 and 33.3. So only 1 degree warmer and only 1/100th more voltage drop. No, again, keep in mind though, voltage drop in the P42A, this is a much smaller capacity cell, so you've already eaten, a lot more of its percentage of its capacity. But still, that's not bad. 382, 377, definitely heating up more than the P45B as expected. 357 volts. So actually looks like we have a little less voltage drop, but again, keep in mind, much bigger capacity cell. Okay, here we go on 10 minutes. 361 and 38.3. Almost, better voltage drop than the P42A, but again, smaller capacity cell. But look at that. That's pretty surprising. Look at that voltage drop. Again, smaller capacity cell, but still, heated up quite a bit more. Again, kind of surprising results. Let's look at the P45B as sort of the, the standard bearer, the best performing. So ended up at, let's look at voltage first. 362 volts, initial voltage drop 404, 362. But look at this. This is what is just crazy to me. Very surprising. 50S at 361, only 1/100th of a voltage drop lower than the 45B after 10 minutes. We're talking about a 10-minute highway run, 55, 60 miles an hour, 10 miles at 60 miles an hour, only 100th behind. Again, I know I've said this multiple times, but you got to also keep in mind the difference in capacity. This is 10% higher than this, 20% higher than that. So how much milliamp hours this pulse sucked out of it, it's a smaller percentage on this battery than on the others. So Just gonna do it on the 50S, which is fully charged. Again, this is from Ukraine. My 50S is from America. Are not here yet. 418. It just came off the charger, so I'm gonna count that it's fully charged. Where are we at temperature-wise? 28.5. Okay, let's see what we do. Voltage drop 372, 371. Okay, 50S, 30 amps on the big tester. Okay, so we are starting temp 31.9, 4.2 volts. Just came off the charger. It's a little warmer because it's just been on charge for an hour and a half. So 31.8. I'm sure if I let it sit for a while, we go down to 29. 31.7. No, it's cooling from charging. Okay, here we go. 50S. $357 volts. Initial voltage drop. Ending temp I'm really wondering about. Now keep in mind, the 50S, even by Samsung, is not rated for 30 amps continuous. They rate it at 25 continuous and 45 peak, which is a joke. But you know, the reason I'm testing it this way is because battery makers are claiming power levels with these pulling 30 amps, which is not correct. So, and I will try this at 35, but I'll shut it down if it goes too high. I was talking when we hit the 1 minute. I'll have to go back and mark where we were at 1 minute. Okay, this time let's pay attention. Coming up on 2 minutes. So 334 and 50.5. Okay, coming up on 3 minutes. No, it's still getting warm. No question about that. Gonna shut it down. Okay. 328 and 327, 61.2. 327 and 61.2. So 327, so we're higher voltage. 61.2 though, surprise, almost hit the same temperature. So that was correct. It's still, and I bet you it's still going up. If we can focus on there. See, yeah, 62.6. Still rising after the test is over. Okay, getting ready to do the 35 amp on both Samsungs. Okay, 50S, 35 amps. Let's get this over with. Thank goodness we're starting at a lower temperature, 28 Celsius, 28.1. So here it goes. $343 voltage drop initially, 343. Keep in mind that the 50S is not rated for 35 continuous, like the 40T is, but it's rated for 45 peak, 25 continuous, but some battery makers give their battery ratings based on 35 amps. Now, same thing like with a 40T, I'll shut it down if the readings get too critical. I do actually expect this to perform a little bit better than the 40T based on all the prior tests, so we'll see how it goes. It's good that we started at a little lower temperature, thank goodness. Okay, coming up on 1 minute. .328 and 42.6. 328 and 42.6. Compared to the 45B, that was 348 and 39.6, but it started at a higher temperature. Sorry about the shaking. This is kind of a hard angle to shoot at. Okay, a minute 30. We're already at 50 Celsius. Already warm. 3.2 volts. So again, this is if you're doing a minute and a half of full power at like 28 kilowatts or 25 on a 50S pack, you've got voltage drop way below 50% already, and 55C. Okay, coming up on 2 minutes. Sorry about that. 320 and 57.5. But remember, some battery sellers are claiming they can do 35 amps on a 50S pack. I'm just having my finger on the off button just in case. 66, oh man, come on baby. 67, holy shit. 68, come on, just make it to fucking 3 minutes, come on. 69, 70, come on, 5 seconds, 314, 314, and 73 Celsius. Holy crap, it actually got hotter. Whew. Oh my god. 314 and 70 point something Celsius. Well, I'm never doing that again. I'm never testing Samsung cells at 35 amps ever again. That was enough once for science. So I did this so you guys don't have to. And again, hopefully this is a good enough proof. Never run Samsung, either the 40T, which is a bummer because it's supposed to be 35 amp cell, or the 50S. Never run them at 35 amps, or 30, or even really 25. Okay, again, here goes nothing. Gonna try the 40 amp on the 50T. This is from IMR Batteries, number 1. Of course, I understand 50S. I understand 50S not rated for 40 amps continuous. It's peak. If I plan on just doing it 1 minute, we'll see. If it can go longer, I'll go to 2 minutes, but not if the temp gets too high, like 70. So we're starting at 27.7 Celsius. Sorry about that. 333 voltage drop. 333. So yes, you can rag on a 50S at 40 amps for 30 seconds or a minute. Would I recommend doing it? No. Do you have huge voltage drop? Well, you can see. Okay, so 1 minute coming up on. Let's see what the official numbers are. 316, 45.5. Well, just hit 47. I'll call 45.5. 316 and 45.5. Battery makers claim power outputs of 40-45 amps for a 50S because it's rated at for peak, but you see what kind of temp increase and voltage drop we're getting. Oh, looks like we'll be able to hit 2 minutes. That's a lot of heating in 2 minutes though. Okay, here we go. Let's see where we're at and shut it down. 2 minutes. 309, 66.1. Okay, so what's the conclusion on 42A, on 40 amps, and in general overall? Well, it performed between the P45B and the 50S. It started a little warmer, like 1.5 degrees more than the others, but after 1 minute, our voltage drop was 327. 50S was 316, did the worst, of course, and 45B, 50B, 339, 341. So pretty much right in the middle between the Samsung and the 45B. Okay, now it's time to get to probably the most controversial and most overhyped cell in the entire E-moto and Surron marketplace. I don't know about in other markets like Razor and electric motorcycles, but I think there's been more discussion, more argument, more words typed, more screaming between enthusiasts about the 50S than any other cell. So let me give you my opinion on it as briefly as possible. I was actually pleasantly surprised by it. Pros of the 50S, like I said in a lot of the testing. First of all, it's got the highest capacity of anything in this category at 5,000 milliamp hours, so huge capacity. It's got the highest energy density by volume of any cell, meaning you can stuff the most watt hours, the most range into the smallest package of any cell. So if you're looking for huge capacity and huge range in a small box in like a battery, you know, you want a Surron battery that's only stock height and not too high, 50S is a great choice for that. Also, like I said, I was really surprised in a lot of the tests, especially the low mid power tests, like the mixed load test that you saw and the 55 mile an hour steady for 10 minutes test. The 50S performed great in those, absolutely great. And what I think it shows really, really well is that it can handle short bursts of heavy load, of high power, like those 23, 25 amp bursts, which is a way I think realistically a lot of us ride in real life. So it can handle those short bursts and then longer times of lower load without voltage sagging too much and without getting too hot. So for that kind of, you know, real world type of riding, it did really well. So like I said, within its limits, like I described, it performs really well. Now, but we have to get to the cons. First of all, it is not a high power cell. The Samsung's claim of 2545 is absolutely, as I've said before, ridiculous. It's false advertising. It's deceptive marketing. It is absolutely not a 25 continuous 45 amp cell. It overheats like crazy at those levels. And like I say here, it overheats and has huge voltage drop at higher loads of 25 amps and higher. The next con is this cell, more than any other I've seen, has been misadvertised by manufacturers, battery pack and bike manufacturers, and deceptively marketed by many manufacturers too as a high power cell. Maybe they were just naive and taking, you know, at face value what Samsung said and then passing that along because it looked good to say it's a 2545 cell. But you know, you've got the information now, manufacturers. You've got, and they knew this, I'm sure, before I did it. But you know, it's been mismarketed a lot. Next con: the price is not that much lower than the P45B now that the 45B has come down, depending on where you're looking at it from. And if I was looking for a high power cell, you know, for having a 25 kilowatt E-moto Surron build, the P45B is definitely still the better choice for high power because, as you saw, the voltage drop much better, the temperature increase much less. So for high power, the P45B is better. Now let's look at the Batemo model, because to me this is really interesting. Let's look at capacity. They measured it at 504, actually a little more than the you know, listed thing, and also I measured it. I think it has the highest measured capacity of all the cells I looked at too. It's also heavier than the other cells, which is interesting. Interesting looking at the current too and the power. Let's talk about power first. They list a peak power of 101 watts, and if I remember correctly, because I'm just going off memory, the P42A was 110 and the 45B was 130 and the 50B was 138. So you definitely less power, like we said. But look at the amp rating that they give it. They give it a continuous 16.9 and a peak 29.2. And to be honest, I was thinking actually about this lying in bed, thinking, what am I going to say about my opinion? What's the real, after all this testing, after all my experience and knowledge now of the 50S, what's my real estimate that my opinion is of continuous and, peak power for the 50S? What's realistic that it can perform, without going past its abilities, without overheating? And I was going to say 15 and 30, 15 continuous and 30 peak, because if you look at my mixed load, that was 23 peak and 12 continuous, and it handled that just like a champ, with very little voltage drop and not a lot of temp increase. So pushing that a little further, I was going to say 15 and 30, and here you see the Batimo model, they gave it a continuous 69 and a peak of 29.2. So I think if you're designing your pack, your build for 15 and 30, and you can calculate that, based on, we already know the formula, if you're within those limits, 50S is still a good choice.